I want to speak to you about abortion. In New Zealand now, it is legal to have one if you meet the criteria, but it's wise not to be open about it afterwards. It's legally all right to perform them on girls under 16 without their parents' permission, but it isn't mandatory that she or her family have counselling and help. We allow our women to present for multiple abortions, yet little is done to educate them and get them to look at why they are driven to have multiple abortions. We say we have a good criteria for checking why you need an abortion in New Zealand, but I'm fairly convinced that there are not 14,500 women in New Zealand who meet the medical criteria for either mental or physical unwellness this year. I work for a program called Living in Colour, and in my work, I find that so many people in positions of influence are unwilling to engage in debate or discussion about abortion. Doctors, social workers, pastors or priests just find it too difficult to confront. It's almost too hot to handle. What is the source of our disquiet as a nation when we have allowed something legally, but we've refused to openly discuss it or consider its long-term effects? Meanwhile, we turn a blind eye to the grief that frequently accompanies this event. The loss of a child is traumatic at any time, but this grief is a forbidden one. And here's where our organisation comes in. The name refers to the fact that many women following an abortion, whereas we all have a colour and grey areas in our lives, once you have an abortion, you tend to squash down your emotional responses, which means that not only do you not feel the sad things at the bottom, but you don't feel the highs at the top. So we talk about that as living in the grey zone. The indications of this can be that women are anxious, there's an avoidance of babies, there's a fierceness about a lot of post-abortive women. There's often a lack of bonding with subsequent children, or they become smother mothers because they're so anxious, they want to do everything right. And there can be depression or sadness. Hypervigilance is common, inappropriate anger, panic attacks, and obsessive control over everyday things. Often the addictions show up as being a workaholic, alcoholic, or into drugs. And there can be just a general feeling of self-loathing or a disinterest in life. We run the Living in Colour program in small groups. I come from Tauranga, by the way, preferably with facilitators who have already themselves experienced abortion. And we purposely use a home as a venue so that intimacy and privacy are assured. The participants have time to reflect on and to unpack their own lives in a way so that they gain understanding of who they were before the event and how their lives may have changed. They have a manual that they work through. And the themes that we explore are these. We look at how we were prior to having an abortion, how we experienced the event and its ongoing consequence, what symptoms we exhibit and what effects they may be having on us, who was involved and what role they played. We make a fearless moral inventory about people we may have hurt. We write letters to anyone we may need to forgive. We acknowledge our children and have a chance to farewell them. And we decide how we may live from there on. There is much sharing in these groups and there's often tears. Remember the nature of abortion, that it is often a shameful hidden event. In some cases, the abortion happens so fast that they do not make the connection until later on. In the distress of finding themselves pregnant, nobody has told them that this is a loss and they can expect to feel grief. Few talk about the loss afterwards, and the unexpressed grief goes underground. Disempowerment and disenfranchisement are common. Women arrive having probably shared it with very few people, and they may have even hidden it from themselves. The most noticeable characteristic at the beginning of the course is that they speak quietly. As the course progresses, they gain a voice, and it's quite often a very strong one, I'll tell you. For the first time, they get a handle on the grief in a supportive environment, and there's an opportunity to integrate their loss into their life story. The conflict for them is that they've probably given permission for it to occur in the first place. The healing is astonishing. The support of fellow participants and common experiences helps the group to bond in very powerful ways. Babies who've had no name or acknowledgement suddenly become real and part of their mothers' lives. And so she, in turn, has permission to grieve and resolve some of the pain. So who might you meet at one of these groups? Women just like me. I am post-abortive, excuse me, I didn't plan on this. My abortion was 38 years ago. Such was shame that even the father did not know of the event. I disassociated from what I had done, and I hid it for 17 years until I became quite literally burdened down by what I considered to be a yoke across my shoulders. At no point did I make the connection that it had anything to do with the abortion. That's how self-deceiving I was. One of the symptoms that I exhibited was that I appeared to be fierce, and that's really common. I held others at arm's length. Appearing to be a party animal, I covered up a deep wounding at how I had offended my own moral code. Few people got past that barrier. While using alcohol, I could numb how I really felt. Promiscuity was another comfort, but a temporarily warm one. Another contributing factor for me was a poor relationship with my own mother, which led to me thinking that motherhood was not to be valued or important. 4 years later, I experienced postnatal depression when I had my next son. And at times I felt like I could kill him. And I fully understand how women end up in that position. I can remember my husband was at sea for 2/3 of every year. I can actually remember standing at a bedroom door and throwing my son across the room onto a double bed because I couldn't get him to stop crying. And a friend said to me in the middle of all this, she said, she was struggling with mothering too, and she said, "I now know why tigers eat their young." And I had some understanding myself. Fortunately, I got some help, by the way. Fortunately, a third son was born who I bonded with immediately, and he became an absolute joy to me. I've had much healing, the best of which is that I now have a wonderful bond with my oldest living son. One consequence that I've had to square up to is that I can blame no one but myself. I had bloody-mindedly made the decision with no consultation of other participants. Having to acknowledge this was a really painful experience. As part of the course, I wrote a narrative of a day I spent with my son, the aborted one, which was wonderfully healing. I loved integrating him into my life in a tangible way. So who might you meet on these courses? We have women who are in their 50s, who've had abortions, no live children, now facing menopause and grieving for their children. We've had a girl who's experienced incest and had had 2 abortions prior to 16. We've had women who are married and fallen pregnant very quickly after having had a child and felt they might not cope. We've had women whose mothers have insisted that they abort rather than shame their families, in some cases, against their will. The reasons for abortion are many. The solution appears expedient. The availability means that you can get it performed within days. It's a common story of panic, and few are offered the chance to reflect and contemplate all options of what they could do rather than abort. And let's bring one other thing into it in New Zealand. This is a multi-million-dollar business. Let's not kid ourselves about the motivation of the service that is offered. So what can you do? Don't judge us. We've done enough of that ourselves. Rather, put a hand out and offer support where it's needed. The cost of this action has many consequences for many of us, and even the healed grief stays with us for a lifetime. I mark my missing son by the landmarks of my younger son's lives. It's an ongoing grief. He may have gone, but his impact has never left me. I want now to turn that to good for somebody else. Publicising living in colour is difficult because abortions are a hot topic, and few people we approach actually want it in the public arena. As long as we maintain that stance, the word may not get out as to the possible consequences of abortion for our women and men. Living in Colour is a brilliant program that alleviates suffering of abortion. It's available to anyone who would like to offer it. If you feel it would be useful to people in your community, then please approach me. Courses are currently available in Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Auckland and Tauranga. For the future of our nation, we need to have healed, vibrant women and men who live in full colour.